Welcome everyone, I'm Spiro. Thanks for tuning in. I know we're all pretty much sick of hearing about the virus. I'm sick of reporting on it, to be honest with you. Everywhere we look, it's virus, virus, virus. But if there's one topic that even comes close to the amount of coverage that the virus gets, it's vaccines. And as we get closer to this vaccine rolling out, we're going to hear about it more and more. And the big question is, will it be mandatory? Well, recently, Jason Goodman of Crowdsource the Truth interviewed Alan Dershowitz, and Dershowitz made some very bold and controversial statements.
Let me put it very clearly. You have no constitutional right to endanger the public and spread a disease, even if you disagree. You have no right not to be vaccinated. You have no right not to wear a mask. You have no right to open up your business.
Wait, can I stop you? No right not to be vaccinated? Meaning if they decide you have to be vaccinated, we have to be vaccinated?
Absolutely. And if you refuse to be vaccinated, the state has the power to literally take you to a doctor's office and plunge a needle into your arm. If the vaccination
Where is that in the Constitution?
If the vaccination is designed to prevent the spreading disease. If the vaccination is only to prevent a disease that you will get, for example, if there's a disease that will kill you, you have the right to refuse that, but you have no right to refuse to be vaccinated against a contagious disease. Public health, the police power of the Constitution, gives the state the power to compel that. And there are cases in the United States Supreme Court.
Now, who is this guy and what the hell is he talking about? Well, Alan Dershowitz, who is a lawyer, he's a high-profile attorney who has formerly represented President Donald Trump, O.J. Simpson, and even Jeffery Epstein, amongst other high-profile clients. So what is he talking about? Forced vaccinations? Plunging a needle into your arm? Strapping you down to a table? What the heck? I mean, that can't happen here in America, right? Right? I mean, well, actually in 1905, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld a decision that established, so they say, the so-called constitutionality of compulsory state vaccination laws to protect the public health. In other words, it's for the greater good of the state, not you as an individual. This case is known as Jacobson versus Massachusetts. This was during the smallpox epidemic. Of course, another epidemic, a great public health threat, right? I'm not going to get into smallpox, but we're just going to continue to look at this case and the implications it may have today. And the state of Massachusetts, back in those days, in the early 1900s, mandated vaccinations for the smallpox. Jacobson refused. He was fined and then jailed. Now, to make a long story short, he appealed the ruling, and the case eventually went to the Supreme Court, and Jacobson invoked his constitutionally protected rights under the 14th Amendment, which asserts that no state shall make or enforce any law abridging the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States or deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. Now, the Supreme Court ultimately ruled in favor of the state and ruled against Jacobson and recognized each state's, quote, police power, which gives the state authority to enact health laws of every description, including quarantine and vaccination laws, to protect public health and the safety of its citizens as a whole, not the individual, because it all is for the greater good of the state. Right? I hope you see where this is going. Now, Jacobson voiced concerns about the safety of the vaccine, which was backed by some medical physicians who supported his claims. But the court ruled when determining the legality of a statute enacted to protect the public health and safety, the court found it immaterial that a portion of the medical community thought that the vaccines were worthless or even injurious, in other words, causing injuries. They found that immaterial. They continue, the state has the right to choose between opposing medical theories and to refer the matter to a board composed of persons residing in an affected location who are qualified to make a determination. Now, of course, I could pick a board of individuals right now, pay them some money and say, hey, I want you to vote this way. Okay, that's what lobbying is. We know how powerful the pharmaceutical lobby is here in this country. It's unbelievable. They continue, the court does not become involved in legislation formed under the state's police power as long as it relates substantially to public health, morals, or safety and is not plain invasion of rights secured by fundamental law. Furthermore, it is immaterial whether or not the vaccine is actually effective, so long as it is the belief of the state authorities that mandatory vaccine will promote common welfare and is a reasonable and proper exercise of police power. It is of paramount necessity that a community have the right to protect itself from an epidemic of disease which threatens the safety of its members. In other words, you have no individual rights or liberties. It's about the rights of the community as a whole. It's the greater good of the state. This is a very dangerous, slippery slope. I'm all for everyone else being, happy and good, and but when it comes down to it, it's about the individual. The individual liberties that we have is what makes us stronger and what protects us. Okay, when you start saying it's for the common good, I mean that sounds like freaking communist Russia or China or something like that. Now, this is straight from the American Medical Association's Journal of Ethics, which is quoting from the ruling of Jacobson versus Massachusetts. And this might be a good time to remind everyone that the Rockefeller Foundation essentially created the American Medical Association, or the AMA, and effectively took over the entire medical system of America. Okay, so this is what Dershowitz is referring to. And this is what Bill Gates is referring to when he proclaims that you don't get a choice. You don't get to say no. But that brings us to the argument of, well, hey, you know what? If you get vaccinated, you have the vaccine, then you got nothing to worry about, right? If you have the vaccine, then what does it matter if I have the vaccine or not? Because you should be protected. You already got the vaccine, right? I mean, this kind of challenges the the logic behind these arguments, which do not make sense to me. If you have it and I don't, then why are you worried about me? You're already protected. Now, let's move on. Just today, Dr. Fauci, who is the head of the NIAID, which is the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases. He's also on the White House Coronavirus Task Force and on the Leadership Council of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's for Decades of Vaccine Initiative, stated that the vaccines may actually make the disease worse. I mean, this has been documented in the past, okay? So there is always that possibility, and even, Fauci himself is admitting this in testimony. So while everyone continues to debate whether or not Trump will mandate the coronavirus vaccine as he readies to deploy the military to distribute this new vaccine, which he stated on record, Trump doesn't have to, essentially. The state legislatures can mandate the vaccine under the legal precedent established by the Supreme Court, right? I mean, that's what Dershowitz is essentially saying and claiming here. Well, let's look into this. That was over 100 years ago. Lots of things have changed in this country over time since this country was established. Like, for example, slavery. Okay, just because it was once legal doesn't make it, ethical or legal by today's standards by any means, by any stretch. And let's not forget that time when Supreme Court Justice Holmes cited Jacobson versus Massachusetts, this Supreme Court decision to uphold mandated vaccines. He cited this to forcefully sterilize Carrie Buck, who was the first person to be sterilized under the state law in Virginia in 1927. Which was a eugenics law, basically, which included sterilizing anyone who was feeble-minded or an imbecile or even epileptic. Now, I mean, who decides who is an imbecile, right? I mean, who decides? Who gets to say who was sterilized, who is an imbecile, who is a moron? Well, the eugenicists do. At least that's what they want. And there was a time in this country back in those days, especially before World War II, where the eugenics movement was established here in this country. They even had an office of eugenics, okay? And the same people who are pulling the strings and running the show and setting up these United Nations groups are the same people who are essentially running the show today, okay? These are eugenicists. Bill Gates is on record wanting to lower the population. His father was on the board of Planned Parenthood, which is a front for eugenics, basically. Population control is what it boils down to. And they were talking, and they had programs here in this country, in the United States, that openly were conducting eugenics population control here in this country. Of course, and they also funded these programs, these Nazi programs in Germany. They were funding these eugenics programs. After World War II, basically, the Nazis got a bad, portrait, a bad stigma about them. They were portrayed in a negative light, of course. Yeah, the Nazis. Everybody hates the Nazis. And so they also looked down upon their eugenics programs. So the eugenics programs here in the U.S. essentially had to go underground at that point in time. They didn't go away. They went underground. Okay, there's a lot of other information out there. I'm going to leave some links below. There's a great report by Corbett, which is Why Big Oil Conquered the World. This is like an amazing documentary which documents and shows and proves that the world is being run. The people who are running the world right now are eugenicists, okay? Population control. Anyways, back onto this story. The Supreme Court upheld the decision in Buck versus Bell. Basically to forcibly sterilize this woman. They validated sterilizing this woman, and this caused these programs to spread throughout the country. Eugenics programs. Now, according to the NIH website, National Institute of Health website, they go on to question the constitutionality of these forcible, mandated compulsory vaccine laws. They state, given the changes in constitutional law, public health, and government regulation, what kinds of public health laws that may address contagious diseases might be constitutionally permissible today? A law that authorizes mandatory vaccination during an epidemic of lethal disease with refusal punishable by monetary penalty, like the one at issue in Jacobson versus Massachusetts, would undoubtedly be found constitutional under the low constitutional test of rationality review. However, the vaccine would have to be approved by the FDA as safe and effective. Of course, the FDA is corrupt. And the law would have to require exemptions for those who have contradictions to the vaccine, which undoubtedly they will make extremely difficult. And they will probably try to limit your interaction in society, whether it's traveling, going to work, or even going to the store. Who knows? They're going to try to make it very, very difficult for you not to get this, in my opinion. Okay, we see where their agenda is going. Now, they continue. The legitimacy of compulsory vaccination programs depends on both scientific factors and constitutional limits. Scientific factors include the prevalence, incidence, and severity of the contagious disease, the mode of transmission, the safety and effectiveness of any vaccine in preventing transmission, and the nature of any available treatment. Constitutional limits include protecting against unjustified bodily intrusion, such as forcible vaccination of individuals at risk for adverse reactions, and physical restraints and unreasonable penalties for refusal. So they're going to make it extremely difficult for you to be able to prove, basically, that this vaccine is going to undoubtedly cause you harm. It's sort of like trying to prove that the vaccine manufacturers are undoubtedly trying to intentionally injure you with their vaccinations, even though they are filled and loaded with lots of toxic ingredients. Now, there's one other part here that's extremely interesting. It says, protecting the country against a terrorist introduction of smallpox would fall within federal jurisdiction over national security. And I want you to remember, just a couple weeks ago, I did the report where Bill Gates was asked, basically, hey, we didn't listen to you before when you were warning of a pandemic, and now here we are. So what should we be listening to you for now? Like, what's coming next? And he warned of a bio-terror attack. He warned of terrorists conducting a bio-warfare attack, okay? And that right there would then remove the power from the legislatures at the state level and give it to the federal government, in the form of national security. So I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just reporting on what Bill Gates said, what the media is alluding to in their recent reports. I'll leave a link to that report below. It's very interesting, to say the least. Now, ultimately, the legislators right now may try to impose a compulsory vaccine, under the guise of the greater good of the state at this point and public health. As the courts have said that, hey, sorry, it's not up to us. It's an emergency. It's a public health emergency. It's up to the legislatures to decide whether it's going to be compulsory or not. And we know how corrupt the medical system is. We know how corrupt the government is, from the highest levels all the way down to the local levels. Corruption is rampant at this point. And at the end of the day, you know what is right and you know what is not right. We must all make our line in the sand. Stay tuned for more. I'm Spiro. Be sure to follow me on BitChute, because this YouTube channel will likely not be around for too much longer. They've already been taking down a couple of my vaccine-related my vaccine-related content. And, who knows if this one's going to stay around or not. But I'm Spiro. Stay tuned for more. Thanks for watching.